Hey everybody, Jeff Bevox here with another live performance tip. Today we're going to take a look at instrument racks. We'll take a look at several ways of automating, switching between instruments, and how to help manage resources through using instrument racks. So let's get started. Alright, to get started we just have a really simple Ableton Live set here. I've got one MIDI track, I've got one other audio track here which I'm using for my voice as it's coming through the video right now. No sends or anything like that, so a really simple project. So let's get started setting up our instrument racks. So the first thing we'll do, and also to call out, this works for both instrument racks and audio effect racks. So all the stuff we're doing right here applies to both. So we'll start out by grabbing an empty instrument rack and just dropping it in the instrument area. We'll open up the macros, and once we have some instruments in here, we'll take a look at some other things. So what we'll do is we'll just grab a couple different instruments, drop them in there. Let's expose the chains here. Let's pick a couple other ones. Guitar unplugged. Let's grab this ancient Greek lyre, and then let's grab a mallet sound. Alright, so we got our three child instruments within this one main parent instrument rack. If we were to play something now, all three would sound. And you can kind of look at the audio output here, and you can see that all three are doing something. Probably not what we want when we're playing live. Typically we will want one of those instruments to be playing at a time, or maybe a mix of two. But for our purposes here, we'll say that we only want one active at a time. So how we do that is we expose the chain here, the chain selector, and essentially based on what number within this range is active, if you have a mark there for your instrument, that's the instrument that will sound. So right now we're in 0, so all three are going to sound. If I were to pop it over to 16 or 17 there and hit something on the keyboard, nothing sounds. Alright, so what we're going to do is create three ranges where one of these instruments is going to be active at a time. So what we can do is I like to start at 1, and then we can, when your pointer becomes this little bracket here, you can kind of click and drag to the ending range that you want it to appear at. So from 0, or actually 1 to 40, we'll want this bass instrument to be active. From 41 till, let's say, 80, we'll want the lyre to sound, and then we'll move this guy over to 81, and then drag that out to 127. So now we got three distinct ranges, one for each of the instruments, leaving 0 empty. And I like to leave 0 empty because if I want to turn all of the instruments off, I can just have the chain selector go to 0, play something on the keyboard or MIDI instrument, and nothing will sound. Okay, so that's how we set up our chains. So now what we want to do is map this chain selector here to one of our macros over here. And you do that by selecting the map button here, and then select the green bar that's over top of the chain range here. To say I want to map that, and then I want to map that to macro 1, so I'll hit map here. And you'll see the name changes to chain selector. So Ableton is nice and does that for us. It notices that we're mapping the chain selector, so it names the macro knob the same thing. Alright, so now if I get us out of mapping mode here, as I move this macro knob, you can see the chain selector travel across. So that's step one. Step two is that we only want the instrument for the range here to be on as we're within the range here. So while I'm here, I don't want this bass instrument to be on when I'm playing instrument 2 here, the lyre. So no matter which one is active, let's change here. Even though we're within this range here, this bass 101 bass sidechained is still on. So what we want to find is a way to turn that off when it's not actually active, because even though there's no sound playing through it, some instruments will still consume computer resources, and we want to keep that unnecessary computer resource utilization down to a minimum. Because what could happen is if you have several tracks and they all have these different instrument racks on them, they could all be consuming resources even when they're not in use. And if we start running low on resources, then we can get audio dropouts or latency, where when you play your instrument, it could take an extra, a couple milliseconds, 100 milliseconds before that sound actually comes out, which makes it really difficult to play in sync with anything else that's going on. So in order to keep those resources, the resource utilization down to just the minimum required for whatever sounds you're trying to create, we're going to switch off these devices when they're not active. And the way you do that is pretty simple. Let's go back into mapping mode. And what you want to do is right click on the device on switch right here and choose map to chain selector. All right, and we're going to do that for each one of these instruments here. Map them all to chain selector. All right, so now we have that mapped. The next thing we have to do is map each of the instruments to the range when they're going to be active. So for the first one, we only want to be active between 1 and 40. So we're going to enter that here. And then instrument number 2 is only active from 41 to 80. So we'll do that. And this one is going to be active from 81 to 127. All right, so we got our ranges matching our chains here. We can get out of mapping mode. And now when we move the chain selector, I'm going to select the bass here. When it travels to 40 and below, you're going to see it kind of light up, and it won't look disabled. And when I travel out of it, it'll go back to disabled. Likewise, if I go to the ancient Greek lyre here, you'll see that it's on because I'm within this range. But if I were to travel out of it, it'll switch off. All right. So only one instrument's going to be on at a time. So now that we've gotten that macro mapping out of the way, the next thing we can do is automate how we're going to change this. So you're not going to the Ableton UI like I'm doing right here and kind of using my mouse to move it up and down. The first thing we can do is automate it through our control surface that might be on our MIDI device. And in order to do that, you click on the MIDI button up here to get us into MIDI mapping mode. And then you select what you want to automate. In this case, it'll be this chain selector macro, so I'm going to click on that. And then the only thing you have to do really is move the knob on the control surface, the one knob that you want to have controlling this chain selector. So I'll do that. All right, so it detected it. You can tell because it's now got this 1/29 on it. I can take us out of mapping mode. And now when I turn that knob, you'll see the chain selector also move in the software. All right. So now while you're playing keys or whatever instrument you're playing, you can go to your control surface and just move that knob or slide or whatever you want to map to it, so that you can change instruments on the fly that way. So another way we can automate changing instruments is using envelopes on the clips. So what you'll need to do is first of all have a clip. Right now there aren't any here in all of these clips here, so what we'll do is we'll right click and choose insert empty MIDI clip, and what we'll do is we'll add 4, one for each instrument and then one to turn them all off. Alright, so we got our 4 empty MIDI clips. The next thing we'll want to do is create an automation envelope in each one of those to select a number within each one of these ranges. So we'll call this, we'll rename that to instrument 1. Let's name these all real quick. Instrument 2. Instrument 3. And then this is all off. Alright, so now we can go into the clip view, and so this tab right here is the one that would get us to where the envelopes are defined. So we'll choose instrument rack here, and then we'll use chain selector, and then here for instrument 1 we're going to select a number within that first range. I think 18 falls within that, and it does. The next one is between 41. All right, it pre-selected the instrument rack and chain selector for us because it remembered that's what we just automated. So I'm going to change this one to 59 is fine. I think that's within the range, and it is. And this next one is between 81 and 127. So we'll go with 104. And then this last one, we want to set that to 0. So everything is off. Alright, so now we can test it out. Since we already have instrument 1 selected, we'll choose instrument 2 first. And you can see it jumped over here. We can play instrument 3. Now here's something interesting. So we have global quantization set to 8 bars. So what'll happen is the way the clips are currently set up, it'll wait for that 8 bars to roll around before it actually plays the clip, which has the automation in it for switching the chain selector here. So another thing we can do to not have it wait for that global quantization to come around again is you can go back to clip view, and you can turn looping off, and then under quantize here you can change this to none. Alright, sometimes you might not see that quantize option, and that's because if this is kind of folded in, you won't see it. So just click on that triangle and it'll expose those options there. Alright, so we could go through and do that to each one of these individually, or we could multi-select each clip, command click or control click for multi-selecting. That way you can make the changes just the one time instead of going through each clip at a time. So yeah, if we look at the individual clips, you see they all have the same not loop setting and quantize set to none. Another thing you might want to do while you're in clip view here for each one of these is let's shorten how long it's actually going to play, since really it's just going to hit that envelope and not doing anything else. So let's move these guys over, make them super short. All right, so now even though our global quantize is set to 8 bars, we can kind of move at will in real time. All right, so that's automation using envelopes. So there's another way you can automate those changes as well, and that's through ClyphX. And ClyphX is an open source kind of pseudo control surface, which lets you execute script commands in each of these clips. So you can have a different script command for this clip, or a set of script commands for this clip, and another set here, another set here, another set here. So it's very powerful. I use it a lot for automating a bunch of things in my live set for my solo live performances. Very useful. You can check out my live set walkthrough video for more details on ClyphX. Essentially, if you just search for ClyphX download in Google or wherever, it'll give you one of these as a search result pages. It's a GitHub page, and it lists out the installation instructions. It's got a link to the manual. Let's pull that up real quick, which has more details on initial setup, and then some basics on scripting, and then the listing of all the commands that are available through scripting. So very powerful, highly recommended. You can pretty much automate anything in Ableton with this. So I'll have a link in the description to this GitHub page right here, which is a launching point for anything ClyphX. There's some good blog posts referenced here as well. All right, so the way ClyphX works, I'll show you how it's set up as a control surface in Ableton preferences. So once you have it installed, you just select that as one of the control surfaces, and then basically it's there to interpret the commands that you're going to be putting in the clips here that we'll be entering in just a moment. All right, so similar to envelope automation, where we have to have a MIDI clip there, same thing with the ClyphX scripts. So we're going to create 4 empty MIDI clips. And basically the way it works is the names of the clips are what's interpreted as the scripts. So in order to identify to ClyphX that this is a ClyphX script, not just a plain old clip name, you can start with an open and then close bracket. What you can do is you can put any kind of text in between those brackets if you want to name your clip something to make it recognizable. For example, we can call this instrument 1 on, but it's not necessary. You can just do open and close bracket if you wanted to, but sometimes it's nice to see what's going on in the clip, so you might want to give it a name of some sort. All right, so now that we've got that identifier there, and ClyphX knows that what's coming next in this clip name is an actual script command, we can start with our script commands. So in order to operate on the devices here, the start of the command is DEV for device. And then when you want to change one of these macro values, you use the letter P and then the number of the macro. All right, so number being 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So we want to change macro number 1, so it's going to be P1, and then you give it a value from 0 to 127, or whatever range that you've given this this macro. So we stuck with 0 to 127 because that works well with having the chain selector and the device on and off working together. So you give it a value between 0 and 127 that you want it to be. So we'll say 24 is within the chain range for instrument 1. And then go to the next clip. And just to show you that you don't need a name in there, I'll just do an empty open and close bracket. So dev P1, and then let's give it 56, because that looks like it's within our range here. So dev P1 and then 104. And then our last one is going to be used for turning everything off. So off, dev P1, give it a value of 0. Get back to clip view, turn looping off, quantize none. Alright, so now if we click on one of the clips, we should see it jump the chain selector macro, and thus the chain selector over here over to where it's expected to go. All right, and just to show some examples, right now we're on chain 0, so nothing's playing. If I run the clip, so that we got instrument 1 selected, that's the only one that's making sounds. It's the only instrument that's active. Instrument number 2 now. Alright, that's the only one making sounds. And now instrument 3. So what's also nice about having these guys loaded up in clips is you can go to your Ableton push and, you know, select your devices that way using the push or any other kind of matrix controller. Instrument 1, 2, 3. So it's just another way of switching instruments. You know, you can switch over to your session view on your push, select the clip that's got your instrument activated from it. You know, you can go into note mode on your push after you've selected your instrument and then play on that, or you can select your instrument on the push and then move to your standard piano style keyboard to do any other the actual playing. Okay, so we've seen automation through envelopes, through your MIDI controller, and also using ClyphX. Obviously pick the one that works out best for you. You've got some options, and you should be good to go. Well, that's about it for our walkthrough for setting up an instrument rack for live performance. I hope you learned a lot. I know I did in researching all this and how to make it work with all the different ways of automating. So if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. If you like what you see, hit that like button. If you want to see more in the future, hit subscribe so you get notified when I put new videos out. All right. Thanks a lot, folks.